Okay, here we go. All right, the recording's in progress. This is session six of just this. We're just getting into it, just getting going good. Okay, so we're going to be starting on page 15. Before we jump into the text, any old business from last week, the week intervening, anything that you wanted to pick up on, take up on, something stuck in your craw, anything like that?
Yeah, Dave, I would like to go back to the middle of page 14. I mean, that just jumped off the page at me, and I mentioned it last week, but it says, without some awareness of our common habit of projection, most relationships will not last, but become serial infatuations or create entirely unnecessary enemies. And well, I never understood why my exes and I could not be friends after we had a close, intimate relationship. And it says, without maturity in seeing, we never really meet or accept the other as other, but live out our own inner states over and over again, like a dog chasing its tail. Well, I saw myself doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my autobiography of my midlife years.
Well, thanks for sharing, John. And I guess I only have one question. Do all your exes live in Texas?
No, one of them does.
Okay, just checking.
So that's all I'm going to cop to.
All right. Well, you're pointing out something so really important for us to see. You know, this is going to affect all our relationships. If we can't get to the place where we are really tracking in real time, aware in real time, able to make our choices based on what is right in front of us, what's going on right now, rather than from all the programming from the past, then yeah, our relationships are always going to suffer. And we won't be able to really be present to anybody ever. Now, it's just like, we say over and over, you can't have a relationship with an active alcoholic or addict. But if we're in the throes of our emotional, triggers, then we're not any more present than an alcoholic or addict is. And so it's the same thing. It's the same problem. We have to be present. We need to be present. Contemplation is the art of being present, if you will. It's what we can do in order to get the kind of presence and connection that can lead to mystical experience. Contemplation is the how, and then mysticism, I suppose you could say, is the what, the state of being. But contemplation is a way to be able to get to that state. Without it, all our relationships.
I've discovered that you can tell an alcoholic, you just can't tell him much.
Okay.
Can you
So
repeat
here,
contemplation is the what?
Yeah.
How?
What was that?
Yes, contemplation is the how. It is the path to mystical experience. So if you want to know,
what did you say about an alcoholic? You said you could always tell an alcoholic how?
That's John's joke. Is that what you're talking about? You can always tell an alcoholic, you just can't tell him much. That was John's joke just now. Is that what you're talking about?
I took him literal.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Just don't listen to John and you'll be fine. All right. So here we are. We're still in the introduction here. We're just in the introduction. But it's interesting where he's going with this. He starts with this awe and surrendering to it. So this idea that if we're really going to be able to be in any kind of contemplative state, if we're going to be changed at all by our contemplative practice, we have to get to the point that the moment itself, the moments that we experience are stunning to us again, that they are awe-inspiring again, that we actually see even in the seemingly insignificant something that is awe-inspiring. To get to that place of seeing again, beginner's mind, all the things we've been talking about, and then surrender to that, actually become a part of it in ways that we're not just simply resisting or motoring past it 70 miles an hour. So it's that ability, again, to be awe-inspired by the moments that we are seeking. And in order to get to that place, we have to go through the log removal process. We have to take the log out of our own eye before we try to inspect the speck in somebody else's. But that is the process of clearing the mechanism. That's the process of stepping away from all the preconceptions, all the stuff. And, that literally is a lifelong process. It's a peeling of the onion. But we're not looking for perfection here, just progress, right? We can get to 51%. More often than not, we are seeing clearly. We are seeing what is really right in front of us. We're seeing the beginner's mind. Now we can have relationships. Now we can be someone that can be counted upon. Now we are someone who can be fair, equitable, compassionate, present. And the next section that we're going to dive into today on page 15 is seeking dispassion. So what is it that clouds all of that mechanism? What is it that takes us out? And that is the emotions that are so triggering to us, the emotions that wash all over us, the emotions that make us feel as if they are true and they're a true representation of the reality that's right in front of us at the time. That keeps us in that cocoon, in that bubble, and keeps us apart from the others that share our moments with us. And so we're going to find that the ancients and in contemplative practice, it's about regulating those emotions. It's about finding a place of peace and calm and not being blown about by those emotions. All right, and he's going to take us back to the Desert Fathers and Mothers, whom we've spent a certain amount of time with, right? We should all know the Desert Fathers and Mothers by now, right? Mm-hmm. So the Desert Fathers and Mothers, let's see, let's read, we'll read at least a couple of pages here, and then we'll go back. So the Desert Fathers and Mothers who emerged in the early centuries after Jesus, despite their seeming primitiveness and asceticism, often demonstrated an amazing awareness of the connection between the one seeing and what is seen. And in this regard, they're almost Zen Buddhist in their simplicity, stories, and insight. The Syrian deacon Evagrius Ponticus, 344 to 399, who is sometimes called the grandfather of what has become the Enneagram, so you two Enneagram files take notice, says in the Philokalia that when the passions are aroused in the non-rational part of our nature, they do not allow the intellect to function properly. He and many others make this insight foundational to their understanding of the science of prayer. The seeking of dispassion for ancient solitary monastics referred to the inner peace and contentment that they discovered through their profound experience of what they often called prayer of quiet, building on Jesus' talk of going to your inner room and not babbling on like the pagans do. In this early period, prayer did not refer to some kind of problem-solving transaction between humans and God, nor was it about saying words to God, but was quite literally putting on a different thinking cap, as the nuns used to say to us. It seems that it was not thinking at all, as we now understand it, because such thinking is too often just reacting to or writing repetitive commentaries on the moment. For these desert mothers and fathers, prayer was understood not as a transaction that somehow pleased God, the functionalistic and problem-solving understanding of prayer that emerged much later, but as a transformation of the consciousness of the one who was doing the praying, the awakening of an inner dialogue that from God's side had never stopped. That is why the Apostle Paul could speak so often of praying always. In simple words, prayer is not changing God's mind about us or anything else, but allowing God to change our mind about the reality that is right in front of us, which we are usually avoiding or distorting. Leave your offering there before the altar, go first and be reconciled to your neighbor, and then come back and offer your gift, Jesus says. Brilliant. Too many of us try to do an end run toward godly prayer while still carrying a reservoir of stagnant water within us. Nothing new or good can happen in that old swamp. Let me read the next paragraph as well. Dispassion was the desert mothers and fathers' notion of freedom and salvation, long before we devolved into the much later notion of salvation as being transported to another universe, For many, God is seen and used as a partner in our private evacuation plan more than any love encounter that transforms mind or liberates heart. Such solipsism is revealed in the little, if any, concern that many Christians show for justice, the earth, or the poor. The fruits of love are often not apparent in them, and not even of much interest to many of them. Thus, our true God became missing in action from creation and most human concerns. In my opinion, such a notion of salvation is at the root of much contemporary atheism, agnosticism, and abandonment of organized religion and mental illness itself. We imprisoned God in churches, in ceremonies, and in small fear-based people. Okay, that's a good bite. This is a pretty dense section. There's a lot in here, and so we're going to go back now and kind of pick it apart line by line and talk about it. But before we do that, any initial reactions?
What is solipsism?
Solipsism means to be either to be self-centered, or in more philosophical terms, it's the belief that the self is the only thing that we can really know that exists. So it's being overly focused just right here within your own bubble.
Okay.
Okay. Good question. We would have come around to that on the round trip, but now we've got it out.
Get it out of the way.
Get it out of the way. Thank you, Gail. Because I know that we probably wouldn't have got back that far, and then everybody would have been awake all night wondering what solipsism was. Can't have that.
Had one of those ones.
But that sentence before that, for many, God is seen and used as a partner in our private evacuation plan more than any love encounter that transforms mind or liberates heart.
You want to about that? Where you're going with that?
I don't know. It's like screaming at me, and I don't even quite. I'm still metabolizing it, but it just slapped me upside the head. I don't know why. It just.
Well, okay. Yeah, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but this is good because this is already on your mind.
Yeah.
Think about it. Christianity's birthplace. Christianity came out of a communal society. All right. The East is very communal. It's a collective. The individual in a collective society, like the Hebrews were, or Eastern cultures, the individual exists to serve the group. In Western cultures, the group exists to protect the rights of the individual. You see how radically different that is? We idolize the individual. In Eastern cultures, the individual is only there to make sure that the group survives. The individual doesn't have the kind of importance that we place on it. That is the birthplace of our faith, is in a collective context. And so there's a line that I know, I think it was Tony. Is Tony here? Oh, he's not here. Oh, there he is. There you are, Tony. Yeah, I remember Tony maybe it wasn't you. So if I'm remembering this wrong. Anyway, the line is, and I put it on a graphic for Sunday mornings, is that one Christian is no Christian at all. I want you to think about, was that you, Tony, that kind of objected to that, or was that somebody else?
Oh, heck, I'll take credit for anything good.
Okay. Well, you object to most things, so I just thought maybe it was. Anyway, one Christian is no Christian at all. The idea is that, Christianity means nothing to the individual. Christianity is all love and relationship based, which means you need two or more, right? And so really our identity as Christians only exists within the group. And yet, what have we done now? In the West, we have enshrined the notion of a personal salvation as the highest good. And our prayer is all aimed at a personal salvation that we understand not here and now, but there and then in the next life, the approval of God, the admittance to heaven, and the avoidance of hell on a personal basis. And that solipsistic focus, shall we say, now that we know what that means, that kind of spiritual narcissism has evaporated the notion of community, and that prayer was supposed to have been and should have been a collective encounter, not something based on the individual. In Judaism, there is a line from one of the rabbis that says, any prayer that is not prayed in the name of all Israel is no prayer at all. And if you notice, Jewish prayers are always prayed in the plural. It's always we. It's never I. And so that whole idea of prayer, that whole idea of the faith itself was always based on the community and the survival of the group and the enlightenment and floating everyone's boats higher. And so we've taken that and turned it around. And I think that's exactly what he's talking about. You know, for many, God is seen and used as a partner in our private evacuation plan. Beam me up, Scotty. You know, our whole notion of the rapture, again, is an extension of this. More than any love encounter that transforms mind and liberates hearts. Then that self-centeredness, that solipsism is revealed in the little, if any, concern that many Christians show for justice, the earth, or the poor. And then he goes on to say that he believes that myopic view, you know, that narrow-minded and self-centered view is the reason that the church is losing so much traction today, and is at the root of so much of the nuns and the duns and the atheists and the agnostics and all of this that we're seeing going on in our culture today.
Well, I look at my children because I left my high. I don't have any kids that are in my religion that they were raised in. We are all gone from it, but I have agnostics and atheists among my children, and it all comes from that. I really believe that. This whole idea of the hamster wheel of salvation, that it must be earned, and the whole focused on the next life doesn't make sense to them.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Mm-mm.
Now, how old are your kids, though?
My oldest is 48 and my youngest is 35.
So, you know, they're right in the midlife crisis zone, shall we say, in that transformational period between first and second half, you know, where the things that we do external to ourselves will start losing steam and start drying up. And so then they'll be in a position to make a decision to see where does meaning come from. And so it'll be interesting to see where they go with all of it. But don't assume that anyone's at a final answer, is what I think. That's the beauty of it. We're evolving. And we're only one trauma away from having to evolve all over.
I like that. It says that we imprison God in our churches and ceremonies and in small fear-based people, which kind of goes back a little bit of what I was talking about yesterday about the relational theology concept, that everything is interrelated, you know, as opposed to just this, that God is in all creatures and is speaking to us fully in the world around us. So
yeah. Like I said, there is a lot packed into these paragraphs. Let's go back to the beginning of the section on page 15. We've talked so much about the Desert Fathers and Mothers. I talk about the Desert Fathers and Mothers. They were really heroes of mine. They just helped transform my whole notion of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And most importantly, they helped me to dismantle my infatuation with all things intellectual, you know, because that's my natural bout. I may not be ADHD, but I am hyper focused and I can be obsessive about understanding, about trying to grab onto things and control them and you know, put a pin through them and put them under glass, you know, some kind of hermetically sealed container. I mean, that's just the way I thought that I had to do everything. But the Desert Fathers and Mothers were so different than that. If you've ever read them or read through them with us, it's just amazing, you know, how they are just so simple and so practical. And they will fight at every turn the notion of some, you know, big intellectual house of cards that you're building or glass castle. They'll just tear it down because they know it's just all about living moment to moment with that kind of just your presence. And so the Desert Fathers and Mothers are poster children for contemplation and what we're talking about. They're also the pioneers in the Christian tradition of both the monastic life and of contemplative prayer. So they emerged in the early centuries after Jesus, and despite their primitiveness and asceticism, which means, stepping away from the pleasures of life or even the details of life, often demonstrated an amazing awareness of the connection between the one seeing and what is seen. So now we're back to what we were talking about last time. If you take a look at the last line, he says, most of us have never had the observational maturity, the psychology, and the insights of nuclear physics to actually understand this. What? I'm sorry, I should have started a little earlier. How we see is what we see, is a rather clear message from both Jesus and Buddha. So that idea of the relationship with the seer and the seen, the observer and the observation, and his little nod to nuclear physics is quantum mechanics, that the observer changes the nature of the experiment simply by observing it. Things operate differently when we're not looking at them. When you look at them, then they operate differently. It's kind of like turning on a camera on a group of people. As soon as they see the red light, everything changes, right? If they're being observed. Well, it turns out that quantum particles do the same darn thing. There is this relationship between what is seen and who is looking. And so they had that sense, is what Rohr is saying, that there's a connection between the one seeing and what is seeing. And in this regard, they are almost Zen Buddhist in their simplicity, stories, and insight. And this Philokalia, what is that? Well, the Philokalia is a book. It's a collection of texts. It literally in Greek means love of the beautiful, is what Philokalia means. But it's a collection of texts that range from the 4th to the 15th centuries. And it's a foundational text of contemplative practice from the Greek Orthodox Church. Now, back in the 4th century, there was no Greek Orthodox Church. There was, basically Eastern Christianity, and there was Western Christianity, depending on where you lived in the Roman Empire. But this text has come forward through the Eastern Orthodox Church. So it's their foundational text on contemplative practice, on what is called hesychastic practice, which is a big Greek word that means stillness or quietness or calm. And there's hesychastic prayer, that is this wordless prayer of the heart. When we read the Henry Nouwen book, he was talking, it was all about hesychastic prayer. And so there's this mystical hesychastic tradition within the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Philokalia is their basic text for that. So this Evagrius Ponticus, who is the grandfather of the Enneagram, says in the Philokalia that when passions are aroused in the non-rational part of our nature, they do not allow the intellect to function properly. Whole problem with unregulated emotion, right? All of you counselors out there, you know what we're talking about, to try to get a person up to the point where they can actually regulate their emotions in real time. I mean, that's a big deal. Because without that, how are we supposed to do anything about it? And many others make this insight foundational to their understanding of the science of prayer. So these emotions, since they are unconscious, they're coming from the non-rational part of ourselves. They're nothing that we can just think through. We can't just flip a switch. It's something that we're going to have to work through in order to get to the point that we can, with any sort of reliability, step aside from them, as we do in meditation and centering prayer, and be able to be present here and now, and seeing exactly what is right in front of us, rather than through the filter of those emotions or those core beliefs that are limited. Sense?
No thought?
Comments?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Where it said, where you were reading that, reading about Evagrius Ponticus, and he was the grandfather of what became the Enneagram. He says that when the passions are aroused in the non-rational part of our nature, they do not allow the intellect to function properly. So in other words, going back to that other page where it says that we have serial infatuations, we end up chasing our own tail. That means that we're run on our emotions, but not our intellect. And then so that when the intellect comes in, that's when the honeymoon's over. Am I barking up a wrong tree there?
Well, I think you're gonna find it's never either or, it's always both and. It's
Sure.
not that emotions are bad, you know,
No.
emotions run amok are gonna mess us up, but so is intellect run amok. That's gonna mess us up just as badly. So what we want is a balance between the two. We need our emotions. We need to feel them deeply. They are the windows to, you know, really what's going on under the surface. But we need to be able to see past them when the time comes, and be able to realize that, you know, we don't need to be dragged around by the tail by our emotions. You know, we can learn to regulate them, but we still need them, obviously. So I
Which
don't
is
want
a
you to
great,
get the impression that they're evil or bad in any way. Kathy?
I was just gonna say, which is a great nod to the Enneagram, really, because that's what it's all about. It's really about understanding your style and how you show up for life and figuring out your own awareness so you don't let your emotions drag you around. At least you can work through them, be aware of them, be ready for them, have some coping skills, things like that. So I know he's kind of he ties to the Enneagram a bit, Richard Rohr does. So that's a great connection.
Mhm. And I think when he's talking about passions there in the Enneagram, he's not just talking about emotions. Because I thought of like the type 9, like sloth, laziness is the passion of the 9. And I don't think of sloth as an emotional response, but it's definitely it's not something I have to think about. Like it's just something I have to work through, like you worded it earlier. It's this constant that's part of what I need to battle. Like it's the devil on my shoulder that I need to battle on a constant basis.
I kind of think of it, William, as the lizard brain. It just sort of shows up when you're not ready for it, and there it is. And okay,
And it's
I have to
always
deal
there.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
So if you think about the ascetics, those are the ones who are going to be stepping away from, you know, worldly pleasures. Ascetics would be the opposite of hedonists, right? So they're going to be stepping away from that. Or think of the Stoics, right? The Stoics are going to be doing the same thing. They're going to be trying to become dispassionate. They're going to want to be able to be what we would call stoic, you know, in heightened and escalated situations. And so they are looking for remember the 4 S's: silence, solitude, stillness, simplicity. So in that space of stillness, they're saying we as human beings can see clearest, and we can be the most connected and the most rooted and grounded when we're not being pulled around by the passions of life. Yeah. Now, there is nothing wrong with the passions of life. In fact, we would probably look at the Stoics and the ascetics and saying they're unbalanced in the other direction. You know, what we want to do is bring the extremes to a balance in the center. That's what we're looking to do. Those are, like I said, our emotions are absolutely essential to us as human beings, but we just can't let them run us ragged. So it's a balance between the two. But seeking more dispassion, especially in a culture like ours, is going to be a really healthy exercise, because our culture has pulled the pendulum too far to the side of being run by our emotions and not being in any way disciplined. And so for us to pull it back again so we can end up someplace in the center. And of course, it's never that neat and tidy. We're going to overshoot, and we're going to have to do the pendulum thing. And hopefully we will find that our swings start to move in and in. So we're swinging within a sweet spot, but we're always oscillating. That's just life. Okay, so continuing on, the seeking of dispassion, he has in quotes, for ancient solitary monastics referred to the inner peace and contentment that they discovered through their profound experience of what they often called prayer of quiet. That would be the hesychastic prayer we were talking about. That would typically be wordless prayer. It could also be short little phrases like the Jesus prayer, you know, Jesus, was it pray for me a sinner, something like that. And they would say that hundreds of times, or Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. They would say it hundreds of times, but they would say it until the prayer was they said they would say the prayer until the prayer was saying them. So it was a matter of, you would say the prayer over and over again as an anchor into the present moment. And after a while, it was driven so deep down into your spirit that it became a seamless awareness what Paul is talking about when he talks about continual prayer. And the prayer was now saying them. They didn't have to say the words anymore. Through the saying of the words, they became that grounded. And that would be the idea. So hesychastic prayer, if it's worded and spoken at all, it's going to be in these short phrases that are repeated like a mantra that is coming to ground you. But the whole idea is not to be stuck in intellectual thought, to step away from that thought in order to be completely and wordlessly present and connected. And so they're discovering through their profound experience of what they call the prayer of quiet, building on Jesus' talk of going to your inner room, right? Matthew 6, right, when he's giving us the Lord's Prayer, and not babbling on like the pagans do. In this early period, prayer did not refer to some kind of problem-solving transaction between humans and God, nor was it about saying words to God, but quite literally putting on a different thinking cap, seeing the world in a different way, as the nuns used to say to us. It seems that it was not thinking at all, as we now understand it, because such thinking is too often just reacting to or writing repetitive commentaries on the moment. And this is exactly what centering prayer is all about. A centering prayer itself is just a modern version that Thomas Keating and Basil Pennington, two Trappist monks, put together in the 70s based on the ancient hesychastic prayer of the Desert Fathers from the 3rd and 4th centuries. So they, reading these kind of texts, looked at the kind of prayer they were doing, and they came up with a modern interpretation of it. That is the one that we know, using the sacred word as a technique for being able to step away and diffuse all those recurring thoughts in our head and emotional content. But it was basically just a modernization and a modern attempt at the technique of some sort of hesychastic prayer. But the point here is that it's non-rational. We're not trying to understand our way to God. We're not trying to theologize our way to God. And we're not trying to think about God. We're trying to just be with God. Which means you got to get the egoic mind out of the way, because that's the subject-object blockage. Remember, we talked about the I-thou relationships last week. And this is going to be the I-thou as opposed to the I-it. So we need to step away from all that apparatus that continues to make I-it relationships instead of an I-thou. Yeah. Next paragraph, also interesting. For these desert fathers and mothers, prayer was understood not as a transaction that somehow pleased God. And then in parentheses, the functionalistic and problem-solving understanding of prayer that emerged much later, but as a transformation of the consciousness of the one who was doing the praying, the awakening of an inner dialogue that from God's side had never stopped. That's so important to understand. We often talk about God shots, right? Oh man, got a God shot today. As if, you were in the right place at the right time or did something that pleased God and he shot his awareness to you or some sort of revelation or whatever it happened to be. There is never a moment that God is not shooting, okay? Let's understand that. There's never a moment that God isn't present and revealing himself to us. There's never a moment that he's not, like the rain, just pouring over us. It's we who are out of focus. It's we who are ADHD someplace else and not here and now with God. And so that dialogue is always constant from God's side. It's up to us to enter the stream. And that's what this prayer allows us to do. By getting outside of our egoic minds, we can enter the stream of the dialogue with God that's always going on. And so this idea of a transaction that pleases God, a ritual, something we do that gives us a brownie point. God likes it. And so now he's going to do something for us. If we do our part, then God will do his part. A contractual relationship that we want to believe because it gives us a sense of control. It's something we can do to make God do his part. That has nothing to do with this type of prayer we're talking about, this hesychastic prayer, prayer of the heart. It's just entering into the stream that is always flowing through our lives. And that's why Paul could talk about praying always, right? This transactional prayer is, if you think about it, it's really superstitious, right? Superstition. What's superstition? Superstition is supernatural cause and effect. You know, it's like carrying a rabbit's foot is going to bring you good luck. You're taking two things that are completely unrelated and you're trying to show cause and effect through some supernatural means. If I tithe to the church, you know, I can never outgive God and somehow my mortgage is going to get paid. You know, these are superstitious ideas. If I say the sinner's prayer, then I'm saved and God will approve of me and bring me into heaven after I die. These are superstitions, and it was never intended that prayer was like this. Jesus talks about prayer in just the opposite way. You know, he says, don't be babbling on the way the pagans do, the Gentiles do. They think that they're going to be heard because of their many words, that they're doing some sort of ritual that's going to cause a reaction from God, when God has already reacted. It's just a matter of entering into the stream, taking a look at prayer, not from a superstitious point of view, or as an obligation, or as any kind of ritual that is needed in order to gain God's favor, but or even a way to change the circumstances of life to our favor, or to gain some sort of revelation. I remember someone telling me, you know, I'm going to pray all night until God reveals to me what I'm supposed to do. So he woke up the next morning with red eyes and a headache and not any closer to any clue of what he was supposed to do. But this idea that we can somehow force God's hand, or we can coerce God, or we can influence God, and that's what prayer is all about.
So Dave, can I ask a question? Again, I didn't grow up Catholic, but I have a lot of Catholic friends, and the whole concept of confession. So, I mean, confession, they say their sins, and I guess they're related, but then the priest might say, okay, you need to say 20 Hail Marys. And is that, you know, proportional? If the sin is really bad, it's 40 Hail Marys? Or, I mean, how does that, do people just feel better after doing that kind of thing? Is that it's supposed to make them feel better after doing that kind of thing? Just like a repeating of a process like that?
Yeah, you know, the original idea of confession is a beautiful one. And I think what the church is trying to come back to, they're moving toward calling it reconciliation now rather than confession. And instead of doing it in an anonymous box, you know, a confessional, they're doing it face to face, more like a counseling session, at least in more progressive churches. And so I think they're trying to get back to the root of what confession meant. Confession is kind of like a fifth step in the 12 steps. You know, the fourth step where you do your fearless moral inventory, but the fifth step is actually telling somebody what that was all about. You know, the idea of it that we're only as sick as our secrets and all of that. And so to be able to tell another person about it, to get it out in the open, of course, is a very, very powerful thing. And I think that's where the roots probably were. But like anything else, it devolved into superstition. And if you really think about, you know, the Catholic theology that I was taught as a child, and if any of you grew up Catholic, it's going to be much the same, was the idea that every sin that we committed, and that was just an infraction of the law, any unlawfulness that we committed, was leaving a mark on our soul. We were actually taught this as children. You know, the nuns would tell us, you know, you're getting another mark on your soul. And eventually the soul gets so mottled and gray that, you know, it's just a mess. And these were venial sins. You had venial sins and you had mortal sins. So the venial sins were the smaller ones. The mortal sins, if you committed that, then your soul went completely black and you were damned at that point until you went to confession. And so once you went to confession and the priest said, ego te absolvo, I absolve you, you know, and he was speaking through the power of God, then you were white as snow again and you were good. So I remember as a kid leaving the confessional and walking to the communion rail and saying my penance. And there at the communion rail, once I finished my penance, I knew that I was perfectly clean. But as soon as I marched out the church and walked down the steps again, I didn't know that anymore. Did I do something now? You know? And so it was really, it's a really spiritually abusive process. But confession was the means by which you cleaned up your act. And it's the same as the temple process, if you think about it. Every time you committed an infraction, you had to go back to the temple, you had to go before the priest, and you had to perform some ritual, and then you were clean again. The at least the saving grace of the ancient temple, remember, they were a communal society. So if you committed an infraction, that took you out of community. You could no longer buy and sell. You couldn't take food from another person's hand. You couldn't connect with them because you were now out of community. Once you went through the practice, now the community welcomed you back. And that was a means to be able to heal breaches within the community and bring people back in. Now, in Western Christianity, we're so individually based, all this is happening interiorly. And it's kind of a mockery of God's love. But I think the basic meaning and value of communion is more in the idea of reconciliation, of being able to actually sit down with the priest, sit down with another person and talk through these issues. And that can be very healing. And if we think of it that way, it has nothing to do with the penance that you say afterwards. And I don't know if, in the sense of reconciliation, if priests are still getting penances for the people to say, or they just talk through the issues. I've been out of the church before these things started to come back around. Does that help, Kathy, with what you're asking?
Yeah, thank you. It does
Okay.
help.
Is that where it's related with the verse that where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name? Your prayers will be answered. Where there's an agreement together, and aligning. I don't know.
In terms of what, Dale? Are you asking?
I'm questioning the verse, and I don't know where. I know you know which one I'm talking about. Talking about prayer where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name.
There I am also.
There I am also, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What that's really referring to is the Hebrew court system.
Okay.
You needed 2 or 3 witnesses in order to be able to accuse someone or bear witness about anything at all. You couldn't do it on just one. It had to be at least 2 or 3. And so he's alluding to that, because obviously, if there's just one person, he is there also. God is everywhere and all the time. But what he's talking about is to really be a witness, it's going to be like being 2 or 3 gathered in my name. And that gives you a quorum, that gives you something to work with. And so he's using that. They would have understood that allusion to the court system and what that meant. That now you had the power to witness, and in this case, to witness for your faith, to witness for your beliefs, and not just in a legal sort of context.
That's helpful.
Is that helpful? Okay.
It is. I was also going to say on page 16, right after that, First Thessalonians 5:17, it says, in simple words, prayer is not changing God's mind about us or anything else, but allowing God to change our mind about the reality right in front of us. And I like that, in that when I come to him or come to that time of praying, that it's, help my head, my heart, and sitting there, realizing that that's what the purpose of prayer time is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I remember my mother had a little wood carving that was hung above the one of the doors, and it was that prayer changes things.
Yeah.
And I remember that it's a beautiful sentiment and thought. But if we over focus on that aspect, then we're always approaching prayer as a way to change our circumstances, to change things to our advantage, to change things to conform with our agenda, our desires, whatever they happen to be. And obviously, that's not always going to work out the way we would like. I remember there was a moment in the movie Shadowlands, which was about C.S. Lewis, when his wife dies of cancer. And, obviously he was praying for her healing, and it didn't happen when she died. And so someone then says to him kind of caustically, well, I guess your prayers didn't change anything. And he says, well, they changed me. And really, I think that's what is at issue here. Our prayers aren't supposed to be changing our circumstances as much as they're supposed to be changing us. to be able to deal with our circumstances, or go out and do what's necessary to change those circumstances ourselves, if that's what we purpose to do. But it's about us connecting and stepping into that flow of God's presence. And that is changing to us. It changes our worldview, changes the way we look at things. And then if we need to change our environment, then we can go about working on that. It's under our control. And it's not that, don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying that prayer never changes anything, because sometimes it sure looks like it does. I just prayed to change the course of Vernon's treatment in the hospital. And I sincerely meant that, right? Is that the way prayer works? I don't know. But I'm going to pray for it anyway, because that's what I sincerely want to have happen. But I'm not going to be so hyper-focused on that. Again, not either or, but both and. Bring it into the middle, so that even as we pray to change circumstances and for healing, we still at the same time recognize, like Jesus did in Gethsemane, Father, take this cup away from me, but then on the other hand, not my will, but yours be done. In other words, bring our wills back into oneness again. And so to pray both sides of those prayers, I think, is the beautiful part of our human experience of our relationship with God.
I struggle with that though, because I look back on my life and I think, how much of this did I make happen on my own? And how much was God really involved in anything? Because it almost sounds, and sometimes it just feels from trying to transition away from transactional to whatever this contemplation is, it feels like he is up in the booth at the football game in the nice place where they have the drinks and the fruits and the vegetable. You know what I'm saying? That you get to go in the box. You get to go in the box, and God is in the box, and he's just observing. I don't want just an observant God. I'm struggling with that. I don't want an observant to God. I want to know that he is there with some type of direction in my life. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just a boat tossed on the sea. I'm kind of a little lost in all this, to tell you the truth.
Okay. Well, is that what you're hearing me say, that God is just observing and that he's not involved in our lives in any direct way?
I'm trying to understand, because like I say, being so raised in the transactional, that if I paid my tithing and if I did all that I could do, that God was going to help me get through this, that, or the other thing. But this doesn't sound like that. This sounds more like just sit in the presence of God and everything's going to be okay. And I
No, that's
struggle
not,
with that.
that's the exact opposite of what we're saying. So,
Well, I'm missing something, because I don't like the God in the nice box just watching the game.
okay.
That's
Well,
I don't like that at all.
Can
Well,
I,
that's-
can I add something? This is Ellen.
Go ahead.
There's a story I always love when I first heard it, and I've said it a couple of times here in our forum, that there's a man, there's a flood, and he's gonna drown. Even God, to me, God doesn't want us to be passive. So he says, there's a boat that came, and the flood is rising up, and he says, no, God will help me. And then the boat, they left him. And then another boat came, and he said, no, God will take care of me. And then the water keeps rising up to the roof. And then a helicopter came. He says, come. And he says, no, God will take care of me. And of course he dies, right? And then here he is confronting God, saying, you say you're gonna help me. And then God says, well, didn't you see the boats I sent you in the helicopter? So that's, I think, to me,
I'm not seeing the helicopter. I'm not seeing the boat. If I could just see the boat, if I could see the helicopter, if I could see it, I could understand this better. I'm just looking at, I'm going from being a mover. I've always been a mover and a shaker. And I'm finding out that doesn't work either, because I'm on the other side where it's like, I'm doing everything that I can and it's still not working. So then I'm thinking, okay, pull back. Well, that's not working either. Okay, move forward. That's not working either. And it's like, dang it, can I just have a road sign that says you're on the right path? You're just keep going, Fievel, just keep going, because that's where I struggle. It's like, where are you? Where are you?
Lori,
I'm so alone, I tell you.
Lori, somebody approached me yesterday about praying for a really traumatic time we're going through with our son, who's in a psych unit right now. And his life is a mess. And there was a particular thing, and this person knew, and it involved two very, very expensive 5-month-old puppies, purebreds. And they were now in the Humane Society, and he was going to lose them in 2 days, and they'd be gone. And it was all because he's in a psych unit and can't get out, can't take care of the dogs. The police took the dogs, brought them to the Humane Society. Somebody started praying about all of this mess and felt called to do that. And today, God changed somebody's heart to take those dogs. They are now on acreage in a kennel. My heart changed to my own son because I've had a lot of anger towards him because he won't take his medication, as so often people who are schizophrenic won't. But God changed my whole heart towards him today. And I noticed today, for the first time, the medications were really setting in. It was the first day he's been in the hospital for many, many days now that I've seen the medications working. Okay. And all of those are explainable by non-divine intervention. If you think about it, right? Every one of those things, somebody wants to take the dogs. The medications start working, right? My heart changes towards my son. Those three big things. But those three things all lined up in one day. And I really do believe that's God's primary motive, is to change hearts. My heart, the person who took the dogs, my son's heart, doctors' hearts. I think God is working in the mundane for me. And I think the joy of life is looking for it. I think if we could just look for it and find what awe, to use the word from a couple weeks ago in the Richard Rohr's writing. And I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm saying that nothing supernatural happened. The cancer tumor didn't disappear, right? Everything was according to normal means. But I really saw the hand of God today. And I would tell people I saw the hand of God work today. And that's how I just approach. I kind of like Dave, the way he prays all the time. It's not the first time you said that, Dave. I'm just going to ask. I don't understand the mechanics. I don't understand the theology, but I don't need to. I want this thing to happen. I'm going to go to my Heavenly Father and ask. And so that's what I experienced today. I experienced 3 things that I thought were the hand of God at work. And one of them was in me. So anyway, I thought I'd throw that out there, because sometimes we look for the big and we don't take joy in the little.
So we're coming up to the end of our time here, but I so appreciate, Lori, you continuing to bring these things up, because that's right at the crux of everything we're talking about. And for those of us who have been in this a little bit longer, we forget, we were right where you are in terms of trying to process all this and trying to make sense of it. And I know how difficult it is. Here's what I can tell you is that I feel that God is more intimately present with me now as a contemplative than he ever was when I was practicing a more transactional form of Christianity. Even though I believed that God was more in charge of each individual event, kind of the master puppeteer behind, and I was praying for him to change those things and to guide me. I see God now more as the God of the how I live, rather than what I choose or what happens and all those details that we want to obsess with. But that brings him closer to me, not further away, more intimately involved in the day-to-day, just in putting the wind under my wings and allowing me to be able to make the choices that I need to make and deal with things as they come up. But it does change the whole perspective. I'm not looking to God for the what anymore as I am for the how. And I understand exactly how that makes God seem more distant and up in the box. But through the experience that I've had, and maybe some experiences that like Ken is talking about, I have this sense of intimacy of God, that he's right here with me. So I know it's a bit of a paradox, but if you persevere in this direction, I think you'll have the experiences that I'm talking about. And we can talk about this more when we've got more time and maybe put a little more meat on those bones. But it's not about starting to believe in a deistic God who wound up in the universe is now is just observing and it's all up to us. I don't go that way. But it is a different worldview that I adopted in part of my contemplative practice. It doesn't have to be your worldview, though. You know, that's up to you to decide if you're convinced of. But don't give up yet.
Yeah.
Even if it seems difficult right now, because it's supposed to be difficult right now as you're moving from one frame of reference to another. And I hope some of that's a little bit, even though you still have the 11s between you and guys.
I find myself thinking of a couple of discussions we've had in here before, like this shift from my faith believing that everything is going to work out all right, and switching that more to my faith is more grounded in the idea that no matter how things work out, I'm going to be all right. And I am going to be all right because my God is with me. So it's kind of like that Brother Lawrence thought, if I ever found myself going through hell, it would be transformed to heaven because my God is with me, like that kind of idea. And I also, thinking of Richard Rohr's last book, like whenever we're going through the trials, we never see the trial as a gift in the moment. It's always in hindsight, right? And we know we can always look back on our trials and pull some meaning out of it after we have enough distance and perspective and separation from it. But with that being said, if we know that our struggles bring this gift of knowledge over time, then we can greet our struggles as an opportunity to be with God and allow our pain and our struggles to pull God closer to us. And there is no outcome that we're thinking about or focused on, but just that connection and relationship. I'm done. Go.
I'm looking forward to more dialogue on this, Dave, because I'm feeling much like Lori is, in that it feels so aimless and God is so silent.
Well, God may feel silent against whatever agenda you've got in mind. But
I'm not feeling an agenda but I'm just sitting here. And he's not saying anything. I'm like, what am I supposed to do here? What am I with you, Lori? It's like some passion or direction about something and why I'm doing it, that there's I don't know. I guess I feel like I'm floating in the middle of the ocean, to be honest.
Yeah, I know the feeling. But if God's native language is silence, then that's what he's going to be speaking. It's up to us to start to learn to listen to the silence.
But I sit in the morning, we got this puppy. I go and I take him, get up in the morning, I walk over to the dog park. I sit on a stump while he putters around, and I'm honestly trying to just empty myself of everything, and it just feels so silent and empty.
Can I add one more thing too? And I know we're running late. Okay. Yeah. It was almost 6 years ago, 5 years ago, when I went through difficult time in my life. I was on my knees begging God for help, crying. I was on the floor. The circumstance didn't change, but I have changed in terms of how I pray now. Because there was also this article I read, they interviewed this man. He's actually from Africa. He says, you Americans pray for things like what you said, transactional. Oh, let me win the lottery. Let me be healed of this cancer. He said, us, when we pray, we pray for comfort. We pray for help me endure this. Over the years, that's what I have found helps me. Now, and I've said this many times here, I don't feel God. He doesn't talk to me. I don't see him. But you know what I found over the years? He sent messengers. He sent other people to me to help me. So in my head, he sent representatives of him because I will not see him.
Mm-hmm.
But he sent messengers and angels, I guess.
I think that's the best last word that we could have tonight. And
Mhm.
look at that picture of Ellen. Isn't that the perfect face for what she just said? I just love that shot of you, dear. That is.
Thank you. That was in the midst of my turmoil. I was trying to and I found those roses actually on the sidewalk, and I picked it up, and I had my daughter take my picture in a restaurant.
I want to add something real quick before we close.
Real
out.
quick, buddy, because we are
I
really
promise.
getting.
8 o'clock.
Promise I'll make it quick. Lori, you were talking about God in the VIP box at the sports stadium and how you don't want a God that's just sitting there in the box and not being more active or participatory. For me, what I've found as I spend time with God in contemplation and prayer is that I become aware that he is the box. He's the food in the box. He's the VIP treatment. He's the guy who placed the box where the box is, and you go to meet, enjoy the benefits of it. In the Bible, it says all creation cries out for the sons of man to recognize who they are and who God is, for that matter. So the more you find him available, I don't know the right words to say it, but I think I made the point. So I'm going to be silent and trust that God will minister in that to those that need it.
We ran out of time on this, but I don't want to shirk this because this is an important topic. So, Bill, Lori, remember to bring it up again as we reconvene next year, and let's hit this again. And if not, just cold out of the box after we read a little bit more of this chapter on dispassion, then maybe it'll come up again on a slightly different perspective. But let's keep coming back to it because it is a huge thing, and we've all experienced it. We know what you mean. All righty. Okay. Scott, you're back.
Father God, you've heard our conversation tonight. You're present in all things. And so we just turn to you with these things that confound us or cause us any kind of confusion or worry or concern. We offer up our lives as a tribute to you and just an offering to have your way in our lives. Help us to see you in all the things we encounter and we engage in on a day-to-day basis, and find the peace that you're offering and the victory that you've already offered and made plain that is awaiting us. And the more we pay attention to you, the more we walk in the victories. So thanks for your patience while we learn these things, Lord. Thanks for your love and your concern. And we lift up our brother Vernon. Just ask you to be with him and protect him and restore him to good health for the sake of us as well as his family and for you, Lord, your good pleasure. We pray all this and give our thanks in Jesus' holy name. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Also, if we don't see you before, Merry Christmas, Holy Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you very soon.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Okay, good night.
Good
Night.
Thank you.
Good night, guys.
Good night, good night, good night. Good night.